A few days ago, under the gray winter sky that blankets the streets of London, an episode unfolded that intertwines diplomacy, protest, and human rights in an unexpected intersection between Nigeria and the United Kingdom. The calendar marked March 2026, and while the international stage prepared its spotlight for a ceremonial state event, another act, less formal but equally significant, was quietly taking shape on the margins of protocol. This story, which we now unfold with analytical caution and institutional rigor, begins on that precise date and place, where two divergent narratives were about to converge under global eyes. The story that follows is not one of epic violence or grandiose conspiracies. It is rather a detailed examination of political strategy, collective memory, and how international timings and spaces can be leveraged or strained by those seeking to transform their reality. The central figure in this contemporary tale is Uchi Aquaano, a woman whose name has gained prominence in recent years in connection with a movement challenging the Nigerian state. Aquaano did not emerge from nowhere. Her name is closely linked to Nnamdi Kanu, the recognized leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, known by its acronym IPOB. Kanu's notoriety and the long-standing struggle of the movement for the self-determination of southeastern Nigeria, along with its prolonged clashes with federal authorities, form the complex and multifaceted backdrop of the events we now examine. To understand the significance of Aquaano's planned action, it is essential to understand the context of a struggle that has spanned years, marked by deep ethnic, historical, and political tensions. IPOB, as documented by international media and human rights observers, is a movement advocating for the self-determination of the Igbo people, focusing on the restoration of the state of Biafra, dissolved after the Nigerian Civil War of 1967 to 1970. Since its revival in the 2010s under Kanu's leadership, the movement has exerted considerable pressure on the central government, which has classified it as an illegal organization and at times has actively pursued its leaders. Kanu, arrested multiple times in charge of offenses including sedition and terrorism, has been held in circumstances that his supporters describe as unjust and which international bodies have increasingly monitored. This backdrop of judicial and political tension generates a dual narrative. On one hand, the Nigerian state, emphasizing the need to maintain security and territorial integrity. On the other, many human rights defenders and Igbo communities denouncing arbitrary detention, civil liberties violations, and disproportionate state response. Amid the scenario, Uchi Aquaano has emerged as a prominent, albeit controversial, voice. She does not formally lead IPOB according to statutes or official documents, but her relationship with Kanu, as his wife, and her vocal role on social media and public statements have positioned her as a perceptible interlocutor for the cause. In recent years, her presence has been recurrent in statements, interviews, and demonstrations calling for her husband's release and that of other detainees, while highlighting what she perceives as a pattern of political persecution. This role as a public figure, though not free from internal criticisms within the movement and external questioning about her legitimacy, is relevant for tracing the narrative of the struggle on the international stage. The announcement that concerns us today occurred at a moment when the international agenda gave Nigeria unusual prominence. In March 2026, Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu had been invited by the British Crown to a royal reception in the United Kingdom, including meetings with diplomats, state leaders, and extensive global media coverage. At first glance, these events may seem ceremonial, but they hold significant weight in contemporary diplomacy. They are stages for image-making, showcasing narratives of modernization, leadership, and international cooperation. Tinubu's presence in London was not marginal. It was an opportunity for Nigeria to project political stability and economic strength, especially at a moment when the international community closely observes African countries' roles in regional security, foreign investment, and democratic governance. It was precisely the synchronization between this diplomatic event and a planned action by Uchi Aquaano that captured the attention of political analysts, media outlets, and human rights observers. On March 18 to 19, 2026, Aquaano published on her official Facebook page a call for a peaceful protest in London, coinciding with Tinubu's attendance at the royal reception. The call, described as a rally for freedom and justice, aimed to draw international attention to issues Aquaano has repeatedly emphasized: Kanu's release, the situation of other detainees she claims are unjustly held, concerns about insecurity and perceived political persecution in Nigeria, and broader demands related to governance and accountability. Beyond the explicit content of the call, what made this action strategic was its timing. International politics experts note that coordinating a protest with a high-profile diplomatic event is rarely accidental. Similar situations have been observed in other contexts, where social movements organize parallel actions to maximize media visibility. In this case, while dignitaries and leaders met in ceremonial halls to celebrate cooperation between nations outside in London streets, Nigerian citizens and supporters were preparing to occupy public space with their demands. The potential media coverage of this overlap amplified the protesters' message, presenting it not as the isolated voice of a small expatriate community, but in the context of a major international event. It is crucial to underscore something that organizers of the protests have emphasized: the declared intention for the demonstration to remain peaceful. In a world where protests can quickly escalate into clashes with law enforcement or be distorted by sensationalist narratives, insisting on nonviolence is strategic. The goal is not to confront British authorities or interfere with Nigeria's diplomatic agenda, but rather to exercise a universally recognized right to free expression and assembly, taking advantage of a moment when global attention is focused on a specific country. This distinction is key to understanding Aquaano's approach. It is not an ambush, but an explicit attempt to ensure voices that have long been ignored are heard. The implications of such actions are multiple and merit analysis beyond the surface of the event. Politically, there are questions about how overseas protests impact international perceptions of a government. For Nigeria, a country with a significant economy and geopolitical importance, images of demonstrators demanding justice and questioning state policies can generate critical reflection among audiences who previously held a less nuanced view of the country's internal situation. In a global media environment saturated with competing narratives, social movements that manage to insert their message into coverage of diplomatic acts gain additional relevance, potentially influencing perceptions of governmental priorities and the extent to which citizen concerns are addressed. The Nigerian government's response to such tactics also deserve attention. As of the time of this writing, no extensive official statements have been issued regarding the London protests, though previous communications around other demonstrations indicate the state emphasizes public order and national sovereignty. Historically, Nigerian authorities have labeled some IPOB-linked activities as illegal or subversive, arguing they threaten territorial integrity and stability. Evaluating a government's response to peaceful demonstrations abroad requires considering not only domestic rhetoric, but also potential diplomatic repercussions. The British government, in turn, must balance the protection of fundamental rights with the maintenance of diplomatic relations with Nigeria. This inherent tension illustrates the complexity of the contemporary international scene, where physical borders no longer fully delimit arenas of political contestation. Beyond state dynamics, this episode raises questions about the nature of social struggles in the digital era. Aquaano's call was primarily disseminated through social media platforms, highlighting the role of technology as a tool for organizing, informing, and mobilizing. At the same time, social media can amplify both legitimate voices and distortions or misinformation, requiring observers to interpret circulating messages with caution. The protest is not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a constellation of actions and reactions in a globalized information ecosystem, blending local narratives with international repercussions. Closer examination of Aquaano's role illustrates how personal identities can acquire public political dimensions in protracted conflicts. Her public presence is not only the echo of a familiar relationship with an incarcerated leader, but also the result of active participation in political discourse and calls for justice. This does not imply automatic legitimacy for all her claims or strategies, but it does necessitate treating her voice as part of a broader dialogue on rights, representation, and forms of resistance. In contexts where actors seek channels their concerns heard, strategically leveraging moments of high international visibility, such as the royal reception, is understandable as a means to amplify otherwise marginalized demands. This event also invites reflection on Nigeria's internal dynamics, where tensions between the central government and various communities have shaped much of its post-colonial history. Demands for social justice, decentralization, equitable resource allocation, and cultural recognition have created a fragmented and continuously negotiated political landscape. That these tensions project beyond national borders into international spaces underscores the interconnection between domestic conflicts and a globalized arena. The London protest is not merely a local expatriate action. It is an expression of a conflict with deep roots, seeking influence on global narratives at a strategic moment. Evaluating the potential effects of this synchronized action, some analysts argue that protests during diplomatic events may erode the image of stability a government attempt to project. Media coverage showing both a royal reception and an active demonstration could suggest, for some observers, a divided country. Others may view it as a legitimate expression of pluralism and freedom of expression. This duality is not paradoxical, but an intrinsic feature of democratic societies and contemporary international systems, where the right to dissent coexists with careful management of external perceptions. Furthermore, this situation highlights tensions between security measures and civil liberties. In the case of IPOB and the Nigerian government, multiple episodes of clashes, arrests, and repressive actions have occurred. Some of these measures have been criticized by human rights organizations for exceeding legal limits or failing to respect due process. The plan overseas protests is part of this debate. To what extent is a government response to demands for detainees' release and justice legitimate? And to what extent is a peaceful, external protest a valid tool of political pressure? These questions are complex and essential for understanding the dynamics at play. Ultimately, Uchi Aquaano's London protest, timed to coincide with President Tinubu's visit to the United Kingdom, exemplifies how local struggles can resonate on global stages. It is neither an isolated act nor purely symbolic. Its impact, real or perceived, depends on media coverage, international institutions' responses, and how global audiences interpret and disseminate the events of March 2026. The true significance of this action will be measured largely by the attention it garners, the official responses it provokes, and whether it reshapes conversations about rights, justice, and governance in Nigeria and beyond. This narrative also invites a critical yet empathetic look at the complexities of modern conflicts. The London protest is not an act of violence nor insurrection. It is a calculated exercise of political pressure, an attempt to place certain demands at the center of international debate. Whether it achieves its explicit goals or not, its existence adds another layer to the analysis of how social protests, political identities, and visibility strategies interact in an interconnected world. As cameras light up the rooms where diplomacy is celebrated outside, in the cold London air, other citizens prepare to raise banners, engage in dialogue, and claim spaces they consider essential for justice. The scene is a metaphor for our times. Inside and outside, protocol and demands, official images and reclaimed narratives. In this intersection, history finds its multiple voices, and the attentive observer realizes there is no single truth, but a complex web of perspectives striving to be heard. Viewers are encouraged to follow not only the immediate events, but also the repercussions that may unfold in the coming weeks and months. Beyond fleeting headlines or impulsive reactions, this development reminds us that politics, protests, and diplomacy are pieces of the same board, where each move can resonate far beyond the apparent. And in a world where narratives compete for attention, the question remains, how much can a peaceful protest influence global perceptions of a country? Perhaps the answer lies less in a single event and more in how the voices it amplifies continue to be heard.